Well, welcome to the webinar. My name is Romilly Hodges. I am the lead nutritionist at the clinic of Dr. Cara Fitzgerald and Dr. Ken Litwin. I am delighted to be here with you today to talk about this really important topic, weight loss resistance. We will be recording this call and we'll make it available to you after the webinar as well. So you can relax and sit back, maybe enjoy your lunch, hopefully enjoy the presentation, and maybe find some help to take away with you to try at home. So again, weight loss is such an important topic. I'm sure you're aware that carrying excess weight is a significant problem for our health. It increases our risk for a number of negative health outcomes, such as diabetes, heart disease, cancer, to name just a few. And often when we have excess weight, we just don't feel good. We have less energy, maybe our mood is off, maybe we have increased allergies, more pain, our memory might not be what we'd like it to be, or maybe we just want to stop having to think about our weight at all. We confront weight loss resistance pretty regularly in our clinic, and so to that end, we have designed some pretty personalized programs for the individuals that we work with that match their unique physiology and their underlying issues, as well as their lifestyle and their preferences, which, that's really important. In this presentation, we will look at some of the things that we think about for weight loss resistance, and that if they resonate with you, you can start to apply them at home as well. Let's see if I can advance the slide. Let me do this. For some reason, my slide is not advancing. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Here is our disclaimer. So we're required to put this out there since as an audience member, we're not overseeing your care. So the material presented here is for educational purposes only. It's not intended to diagnose or treat any condition. You should consult with your physician before implementing any of this information. So what happens if you're already eating well? You've cut out processed foods, maybe sugars too. Maybe you're eating more veggies and whole grains. You're doing regular exercise, yet despite all of this, you're still not losing weight. Or maybe you were losing weight, but now you've stalled and your weight is just not shifting any further. Or maybe you just feel like you have to look at a pastry and you put back on a pound. So it can be pretty exhausting, this weight management thing. But you are not alone. And it is pretty frustrating sometimes. So hopefully we're going to find some ways to get past that. We know that it is easier to put on weight today than it was 30 years ago. We don't have to look very far around us to determine that. And by default, it's also harder to lose weight than it was 30 years ago. And in a study published in 2016, researchers looked at data on diet and exercise from 1988, and they compared it with 2006 data, and they found that for the same amount of calories consumed, the same macronutrient intake, that's the carbs and proteins and fats, or the same level of physical activity, BMI was up 2.3 points higher in 2006 than it was in 1988. So this means that something other than calories and physical activity is leading to increased weight gain and to difficulty in losing weight. And the reality is that we see this all the time. It's in the scientific literature and it's there in the experience of functional medicine practitioners as well. But how are we going to start to pick apart what might be going on here? What are the other factors that can be driving this? And one of the ways I like to start this exploration is by looking at body shape. So I'm sure you might have all seen this distinction before between the kind of classic apple and the pear-shaped. Where are we carrying our extra weight? Is it mostly around our belly, our abdomen, that's the classic apple shape, or is it more around our hips and thighs, more of a pear shape? And of course, sometimes it's a little bit of both, and there is overlap here, but where we're carrying weight can give us some clues as to what might be going on. So we can dive a little deeper. Let's look at abdominal weight first. How do we even assess that? Well, one way to do that is by measuring waist circumference. And to measure your waist circumference, you can feel for the top of your iliac crest, which, sticks out the top of your hip, and most often we kind of call that the hip bone, and the bottom of your lowest rib. and then you take the point in between the two, and this is where you want to measure around. And if your waist measure is over 94 centimeters for a man or 80 centimeters for a woman, then that is considered abdominal obesity. These cutoffs are defined actually for European descended populations, so you might need to be aware that cutoffs for Asian men are a little lower at 90 centimeters. For Asian women, it's the same at 80 centimeters. And these cutoffs are from the International Diabetes Federation. Another way you can measure abdominal weight is to take the ratio of the waist to hip measure. And you can use the same waist measure that you already have for the waist circumference, and then you also need to take a hip measure. And to do that, you take the measurement of the widest part of your hip. And if your waist-hip ratio is over 0.9 for males or 0.85 for females, then that is associated with carrying excess weight around your abdomen. So what does that tell us? Well, commonly excess abdominal weight is associated with higher levels of insulin and blood sugar imbalances. It is also associated with high levels of cortisol, which is a hormone that our body produces in response to stress. So we're going to take a look at each of these in turn, starting with insulin. Insulin really is at the center of the connection between a diet that is high in sugar and carbohydrates and weight gain. What happens when we eat a meal that is high in carbs, especially fast carbs such as sugar, bread, refined grains, that kind of thing, is that our body essentially recognizes all of those carbohydrates as glucose and other types of sugar molecules, which is basically what they get digested to. And in response to that, it releases insulin from the pancreas to help shuttle the glucose that we absorb into our cells for energy use. And if we have too much glucose beyond what our cells can use, our body has to do something about that, since high blood sugar is pretty toxic to the body. So now the body will instead switch to converting that glucose into the storage form, which is fat. It switches it into fat for storage. So excess carbohydrates signaled by insulin drives fat synthesis and storage. Now, what is interesting is that even if your blood sugar is normal, your insulin can be elevated. And what this is telling you is that your body is working extra hard to keep your blood sugar levels normal. This can actually happen up to 5 or even 10 years before you have detectable blood sugar problems. And the issue with this and how this can lead to weight gain is that insulin alone is a potent signal for the body to store fat. Most of the time, we only have our blood sugar measured by maybe a fasting blood sugar test or the HbA1c, which are commonly used. But if those are normal and we're not also measuring insulin, then maybe we're turning up to the party a little bit late. Like maybe we're missing something and there are problems already happening. So we have some great discussions on this topic on our website, including a podcast by David Ludwig, if you haven't seen that. He's the author of Always Hungry, and it's pretty interesting. So how do we address elevated insulin levels or elevated blood sugar levels? By far, the most effective way to do that is to reduce the amount of carbohydrate in our diet. So on the right of this chart, we see the highest carb kind of diet, the so-called standard American diet. That includes refined carbohydrates and flours and sugars, etc. As we move along to the left, reducing carbohydrates as we go, we get to the paleo diet, which excludes all grains and legumes, which are high-carb foods. It also excludes a couple of other things as well. But to me, this is one of the reasons that the paleo diet can be quite effective for weight loss, because we're dialing down those carbohydrates, and so we're reducing that insulin signaling. Sometimes, we do get questions about why we're using a paleo diet, and my response is that it's not necessarily about whether or not we should all be eating like our ancestors, because our genes haven't evolved to eat like what we are, to eat how we're eating, which is, very interesting, but not really our main reason for using it. But instead, it's a tool to reduce carbohydrates in the diet, and it also helps to clean up a diet from excessive processed foods, or and it also avoids major food sensitivities such as dairy and gluten as well. If somebody is already on a paleo diet and weight loss is still stalled, we consider moving to the next level of carb restriction, which for us is a ketogenic lean diet. And sometimes we'll do that as a kind of modified ketogenic diet or an intermittent ketogenic, or sometimes a full ketogenic diet as well. So here we're reducing the amount of carbohydrates even more and increasing fat intake, which is actually a pretty effective way to switch the body over to using fat for energy production. So this works really well. You know, for all the different diets that we might use in the clinic, we're always thinking about whole foods as much as possible. So clean food sources, variety, that's the baseline. So for all of the 3 diets that we're looking at here, that's a given. But to really understand how we're altering the macronutrient ratios between them, I like to think of them as having these dials or controls for each of those macronutrients, the proteins, the fats, the carbohydrates. So, you know, some folks are able to lose weight successfully just by cleaning up the diet that they already have. That's the top level there, you know, focusing on whole foods, whole grains, maybe using some legumes, adding that variety, the fiber, the phytonutrients to their diet. Sometimes that is enough, but it's not enough for everyone, especially if we're dealing with high insulin levels and blood sugar imbalances. So as we go down through the diet, we're dialing down the carbohydrates. That's the column on the right. And what you see with the fats is that they might increase somewhat in a paleo term, simply because we're reducing carbohydrates, so the relative fat and protein intake will increase. But when you get down to the ketogenic diet, fat intake really increases, and the carbohydrate intake is very low by this point. Notice that the protein intake doesn't follow the same pattern. So typically in a paleo diet, the percentage of protein intake tends to rise, since both fats and proteins are used to make up calories when the carbohydrates are reduced. However, when you look at the ketogenic diet, protein intake is fattened down again, not excessively low, but not too much higher, since too much protein can actually throw off the ketogenic aspect of the diet as well. Now, these are generalizations, of course, since everybody's implementation of the diet is slightly different and everybody's physiology is different, but at least it gives us a kind of easy sense of what each of the diets is about. So there's one caveat here as well that I would say. To do a full ketogenic diet, we do recommend physician supervision, you know, just to check kidney function, assess for any contraindications, as well as monitoring the metabolic effects. It's a pretty powerful diet. And it's also not something that we tend to use long term. Rather, it's a very targeted intervention to achieve a specific goal, but it's not necessarily what a maintenance diet would look like. Here is just an illustration to show that a lower carb diet isn't a license to eat lots of bacon, sausage, etc. You know, quality is vitally important for it to work effectively. Healthy fats, abundant, deeply colored vegetables, low glycemic, polyphenol-rich berries, clean proteins, that kind of thing. What about artificial sweeteners? Well, I'm sure you're all staying away from these kinds of sweeteners, and for good reason, because there's the concerns over toxicity, and you know, since multiple independent studies actually correlate artificial sweetener intake with weight gain. And how does that work? The problem is that the sweet taste still initiates that insulin signaling, but no sugar actually arrives in the body. So insulin is released, and it acts on the little sugar that is in the blood, and that actually creates a hypoglycemic situation where the blood sugar dips too low, and this can initiate some pretty significant cravings, and then you get excess consumption and inappropriate food choices. So, you know, think simple carbohydrates and binge eating, not what we want really. So this raises an interesting question. What about the natural zero-calorie, zero-carb sweeteners like stevia? And it's often put forward as a healthier alternative. Well, I think we have to ask the question, would we still get the same insulin response from stevia? And I think that the answer is probably yes. And, you know, we do use it in some situations in the short term to help people get over that craving pump. But I think that for effective weight loss thereafter, it isn't necessarily a good idea if we're using it regularly and in any kind of significant quantity. And remember also that it is much, much sweeter than sugar, and you only need a very small amount to get the same level of sweetness. So we have to be careful not to train our taste buds to expect sweeter and sweeter food. So what signs can you look for that might suggest an insulin or blood sugar problem for you? So do you have one or more of the following kinds of things? Do you have an elevated waist circumference, an elevated waist-hip ratio? Other things that can be associated: a darkening at the back of the neck, it's called acanthosis nigricans. Skin tags, another thing. Acne or large pores on the face. Cravings for sugar and other carbohydrates. Those hypoglycemic episodes where you start to feel shaky and you need to eat something now, that can also be a sign. Do you have high energy after eating, but then followed by that fatigue, that crashing afterwards? Polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS. And then the lab values listed on the right here as well, the fasting blood glucose over 90, fasting insulin high, hemoglobin A1C high. The HbA1c, which is the hemoglobin A1c, that's a marker for your blood glucose over the last 3 months. It's kind of an average, which is helpful as well. And triglycerides. So one thing that you can consider if you suspect that this is an issue for you is perhaps maybe even purchase a home glucometer, and you can start to measure your fasting blood sugar at home. But remember, this isn't going to catch a high insulin before the fasting blood sugar state rises. So next, let's talk about cortisol and stress. And we're still talking about abdominal weight here and the factors that tend to drive that. Again, the research shows that chronic stress leads to weight gain. And as humans, we're designed to be able to cope with short-term bursts of stress and then revert back to a baseline non-stress state. And it's the basic kind of fight or flight response. So the problem comes when that pattern is continually turned on, and perhaps not always to an extremely high level, but it's just there, smoldering in the background. How exactly does stress connect to weight gain, and in the central region specifically? Well, when we're stressed, we produce more of this hormone called cortisol, and cortisol has many effects. And one of them is to increase the level of glucose in the blood. So we're back to this insulin picture again, right? The blood sugar rises, blood glucose rises, insulin is secreted, which signals fat synthesis and storage. And when we're stressed, it also makes it very hard to make wise food choices, like this cartoon. Today, I will live in the moment, unless the moment is unpleasant, in which case I'll eat a cookie. We can all relate, right? And there's plenty of scientific study out there that highlights this very connection. In this research paper, they found that chronic stress, especially when people live in a palatable food environment, so think access to higher carb foods that might even be in your kitchen cupboard, these can induce HPA stimulation. So that's a stress response, excess glucocorticoids from the adrenals, insulin resistance, which leads to an inhibition of lipid mobilization, accumulation of triglycerides, and natural fat storage molecules. And the bottom line is the retention of abdominal fat. And in other research, they found, as another example, that stressed women have significantly higher waist circumference than non-stressed women. And we've seen this as well in the clinic with various patients that we've worked with. And I'll walk you through one example. Take Jane, for instance. She's a patient of ours. I'm using a different name for her. She lost 20 pounds through our initial work with her using dietary and exercise adjustments. But then after the initial few months, her weight loss stalled. And after some investigation with her, we traced it back to her increased stress level at work. So even though she didn't feel overtly stressed on a day-to-day basis, she was running her own small business, and of course, everything that goes along with that was taking its toll. So we worked with her to find some stress management interventions that she felt comfortable implementing. And after that, her weight loss did resume, and she successfully shifted another 10 pounds. It really makes a big difference. Sleep deprivation is another way that you're going to increase your stress response. Since sleep deprivation basically puts your body into a stress state anyway, you're promoting that cycle of insulin and blood sugar and fat storage immediately. So the science shows and tells us that short sleep duration is a risk factor for weight gain and obesity. So maybe less than 7 hours a night is too little. We should be trying to get at least 7. Many people need 8 hours of sleep a night. So sleep deprivation has been linked to elevated levels of ghrelin, which is our hunger hormone, and decreased levels of leptin, which is the hormone that makes us feel full. So we get this overall increased appetite. And with chronic stress, we tend to eat more calorie-dense food. We also have increased opportunity to eat purely from being awake longer. And when we are asleep, our appetite signals are suppressed. So with shorter sleep duration, we have less of that. We also see altered thermoregulation with sleep deprivation, which reduces our energy expenditure. And we're more tired, we have more fatigue, so we're exercising less. So do you recognize yourself in the high stress pattern? Would you say yes to any of these? In the past 2 years, have I had any major changes to social activities, sleeping habits, residence, work hours, tension at work, more children in the home? I can relate to that one. Living conditions, personal achievement, financial situation, difficult family or friend relationship, a loss of family or friend, divorce, retirement. Do you feel like you are easily upset or prone to overreacting? Do you have episodes of breathing difficulty or feelings of faintness? Do you have anxiety or fear, excessive perspiration, in the absence of high temperatures or physical activity? Sadness, depression, fatigue, low energy, poor memory. And watch out for this one, in case you thought you were covered. Okay, so let's pause here and take a moment to stand up. Everybody stand up, stretch a little, move a little. Remember that sitting is the new smoking. It's really good to just take frequent movement breaks. Feel free to stand up while you're listening to this and move about. You definitely don't need to worry about being seen through the computer. I can't see any of you. And on we go, diving into what associations we might see for you if you're carrying more weight in the hips, if you're more of a pear shape than an apple shape. Well, some of the underlying factors here include excess estrogen, issues with detoxification and elimination, or dysbiosis, which is an imbalance of the bacteria in our gastrointestinal tract, our gut. So first, let's take a look at what happens when we have too much estrogen. What is estrogen dominance? Well, it's an excess of estrogen, but especially in relation to progesterone, which can lead to increased weight gain, especially in the abdomen and hips. So essentially, the problem is that estrogens can do various things that promote weight gain. They can be inflammatory, and they actually create this vicious cycle of increasing estrogen levels, since inflammation increases the formation of estrogen in the body too. Now, inflammation directly prevents weight loss, and we'll circle back to that concept later on. But there are also many connections between estrogen dominance and a number of the other factors that we're talking about today. So estrogen dominance tends to be associated with increased cortisol, since cortisol blocks the progesterone receptor. So stress promotes estrogen dominance. And estrogen dominance also promotes insulin resistance, which we've seen earlier promotes weight gain. So there's a lot of interconnected factors that can be going on. And our body metabolizes estrogens through our detoxification systems in the liver and then passes them through the bile for excretion. And if we're not excreting from the bowel regularly, if we're not pooping regularly, then those estrogens have a greater chance of actually being reabsorbed into circulation. So elimination is really important for estrogen dominance. So, and other things that I like to bring in here might be some cruciferous vegetables and flax seeds, managing stress, reducing carbohydrates, that kind of thing. So where do you see yourself when it comes to estrogen dominance? How many of these things ring true to you? Breast swelling and tenderness, premenstrual syndrome, irregular or missed periods, mood swings, thyroid dysfunction, hair loss, poor sleep, decreased libido, bloating, water retention, headaches, fatigue, uterine fibroids or breast cysts, endometriosis, and polycystic ovarian syndrome again. You'll see that sometimes factors will appear more than once in these different types of patterns. So look for overall patterns of where you would fit in. Okay, so the next thing that we need to consider is detox. This is something that is always top of mind for us, as poor detox can have really wide-ranging effects, and especially with patients who struggle with weight or who are going through weight loss. The types of toxins in our environment that we're exposed to, as well as how effectively we detoxify them, can absolutely have an impact on our BMI. I know that in the past, the concerns over environmental toxins have been considered somewhat controversial, but I do think that that's changing. Very respectable institutions beyond, the Institute for Functional Medicine. So even the World Health Organization and others specifically called out the concerns around many of the chemicals that we're exposed to and that are still in frequent use today. One of the main problems with how we receive and interpret research data around environmental toxins is that human clinical trials are not conducted, and that's for ethical reasons. I mean, for obvious reasons, when you think about it, you cannot conduct clinical trials where you think the main outcome is going to be harm. So we have to rely on animal studies and population data that draw conclusions about correlation. So one of the things that often gets missed in all of that is that we all have different capacities to process and eliminate toxins. So some of us have more difficulty than others and therefore are more vulnerable to their effects. And as it says on this slide, our individual tolerance level is a balance between how much we're exposed to and how effective we are at managing or clearing those toxins. So this is a huge area, but for this conversation, there's one category of toxins that I want to highlight specifically, and that is obesogens. So there is this specific group of toxins defined in the scientific literature that is known to drive weight gain, and they are called obesogens. And that's not my term, it's the scientific name that's actually given to them. So some or many of these may not be on your radar, but I'll just point out a few, including those that you may have heard of. So the first chemical named here, BPA, bisphenol A, that's been widely reported on, and that's found in plastics and also plastic linings like those used in food cans. And actually on our website, you can go to www.drkarafitzgerald.com. We have an article about how to avoid BPA and support its detoxification. There's another one I'll just point out, phthalates, which is all the way at the end of the list there. That's another one you may have come across, and it's one that we've written about too, specifically in the context of some recent research that came out that linked phthalate exposure to insulin resistance and to diabetes as well. So phthalates are found in many personal care products. And, we can pretty easily identify them just by reading the ingredient labels. You'll see the name has phthalate in there somehow. So here is some more information about where you might come into contact with some of these chemicals. And as you can see from this list, they're quite pervasive in everyday items. Plastics, including food containers, plastic wrap, cosmetic containers, toys, can linings, non-stick cookware, water repellent and stain repellent fabrics, cosmetics and, in general, personal care products, household cleaners, pesticides, pet collars, tobacco smoke, new furniture, and also things like new car interiors, even children's pajamas. So some obesogens have already been banned, but such as DDT, for example, but they are persistent, so they can still remain in our air and water and soil. and persistent meaning that they don't break down and they can actually accumulate in our environment. So without question, we need to be thinking differently about how we manage our environmental exposures. You know, there's a wonderful resource, it's called the Environmental Working Group, that you can access online at ewg.org, and that has a whole host of information about different consumer products, personal care products, sunscreens, makeup, and more, and it helps you navigate through choosing ones that are least toxic, that contain the fewest amount of harmful ingredients. Other things we can do are reduce food packaging where we can, choosing organic foods to reduce pesticide exposure. You know, non-GMO foods too. One of the most compelling reasons to avoid GMO foods is because they're often bred specifically to withstand higher levels of pesticide application without dying themselves. So, you know, they end up containing higher pesticide residues. And one of the things that we need to be thinking about when it comes to weight loss is that many of these compounds are fat soluble, and our body stores them in our fat tissue. And it's actually a defense mechanism to pull these damaging toxins out of circulation. But as we lose weight, we actually can release those back into circulation. And that can be a problem if we lose weight too fast or if we have poor detoxification. So with excess weight, and also as you're losing weight, we need to be considering detoxification support. And we actually have a really nice 6-day detox program called a Health Reset that you can pick up through our website if that's something you're interested in and you want to take a look at. So it's something that I do every quarter just as a maintenance program in addition to kind of daily detoxification. Water. Water is also another way that we can be exposed to toxins. You know, obesogens and hormone-disrupting chemicals can be present in our water. We recommend water filtering systems that use a carbon block filter. That has been shown to remove the most toxins, but importantly, it still leaves behind the important minerals that we can get from water. And if you want to, you can also get your water tested for pesticides and heavy metals through services like the National Testing Laboratories. So, do any of these describe you? I consume conventional rather than organic foods. I drink unfiltered water. I heat food in plastic. I use personal care products with ingredients I don't recognize. I haven't checked the ingredients in my household cleaning products. I live in a city. I live in an agricultural area. I use pesticides, insecticides, and fertilizers on my property. I work in the construction industry or have done remodeling. I have new furniture at home or work. I am intolerant or sensitive to many things. And my brain maybe is sluggish or foggy. I have poor memory. I have aches and pains. So just some of the things that might describe a detox imbalance. And the reality is that all of us are going to score some yeses on this checklist, probably quite a few. And if you're hearing this data for the first time, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the pervasiveness of our exposures. And, you know, it's the impossibility of avoiding them altogether, right? So despite that, there is a lot that we can do to bring our detox back into balance, simply by working to reduce our exposures where we can, and by supporting our detoxification pathways. This is something that's near and dear to me. I've published on this in the Journal of Nutrition and Metabolism with Dr. Deanna Minnick, and Dr. Fitzgerald and I have put together practitioner guidelines published by the Board for Certification of Nutrition Specialists and also the Metagenics Healthcare Institute for Clinical Nutrition on effective detoxification support. So I will also say that if you aren't sure where to start with supporting your next level of weight loss, then detox is a good place to start. On to our next factor that can stall weight loss, and especially weight loss in the hip area, which is dysbiosis. As I'm sure you know, our guts are full of bacteria, some helpful and some not so helpful. And in a healthy gut, we have a microbiome with a predominance of the good bacteria, such that the bad bacteria are held at bay. So dysbiosis refers to an increased amount of the bad bacteria in our gut, and that can cause problems including increased weight and difficulty losing weight. Again, this has been studied, and one of the clearest illustrations is in this research that came out. So here the researchers used a mouse model of obesity to show that probiotic organisms alone were effective at preventing weight gain, and that those protective effects actually held irrespective of the baseline diet. And the specific strain that they found in this study to be helpful was one called Lactobacillus reuteri. Now, this doesn't mean that we should ignore our diet, but it does mean that we also need to consider the microbiome. Bacteria in our guts are also able to change our metabolism of toxins and hormones such as estrogens. They can change how quickly carbohydrates get metabolized and absorbed. They can promote inflammation if they are not in happy balance. So they can also promote weight gain through all of those mechanisms. And bacteria in our digestive tract can also trigger cravings. And amazingly, they can influence us in what we eat, as shown in the study by Alcock et al. In 2014. So some of the ways that they can do this include by producing compounds that alter our mood. They can change our taste receptors, and they even send direct signals via our vagus nerve, which is the nerve that connects our gut to our brain. So if one of the problems that you're facing is cravings, then this is really an important consideration. And cravings, of course, is another really common problem that we hear in our clinic. And I'll give you an example of another patient that we worked with. I'll call her Anna. Anna had had issues with her weight for decades, starting in her 20s with tremendous sugar, bread, and dairy cravings, most especially for pizza and for chocolate. She had had antibiotics a few times as a child, and when we saw her, she had a coated tongue, which that is an indicator of potential dysbiosis. So we suspected that an overabundance of bad gut bugs was driving her cravings, which were, that was at least part of a piece of the puzzle for her. We did do a sugar detox with her, which just involved changing the foods that she was eating towards more nutrient-dense, low-processed foods. We turned down carbohydrates, but she wasn't to go hungry, since she could also ramp up proteins and fats, and she didn't have to do any calorie counting. That was important. We removed some IgG positive foods, which were potentially food sensitivities for her. She also received some targeted supplement support, including a probiotic, and initiated some, additional movement strategies, sleep protocols, as well as stress management support. And she did really well through the sugar detox period, and very soon was reporting that her cravings were gone. And that is the resetting of the microbiome. And what was interesting and really significant to her was that, she started losing weight immediately, but then she found that if she added back any kind of grain at all, it triggered outrageous cravings for her, and she'd have to battle out of them again. So now she doesn't eat any grains at all, and she's really motivated not to eat them anymore. And basically over the 6 months working together, she lost nearly 80 pounds. So do you think you have a tendency towards gut imbalances? Many of us do. Let's look at some of these indicators. So do you have a history of frequent antibiotics? Have you had recent gastroenteritis? Do you eat conventional rather than organic foods? Do you have a lack of colorful plant foods in the diet? Do you have food sensitivities, gas and bloating, abdominal cramping, constipation, diarrhea, reflux, nausea or vomiting? Do you have a white-coated tongue, brain fog, mood changes? Do you have high stress or cravings? One other factor that I wanted to be sure to cover today is inflammation, which again is one of those underlying factors just promoting so many diseases, from diabetes and heart disease to depression, even cancer. Now, inflammation is a normal physiological response to injury. It's part of the process of killing the bad guys, the bacteria, viruses, etc., or after a physical trauma of some kind. And then in a normal situation, that inflammation resolves and it goes away. But what happens if you have chronic inflammation that does not go away? And it's not that unusual in our society that our bodies are actually under constant injury and they respond with this kind of low-grade chronic level of inflammation. You may be wondering, what is she talking about? I don't have any injury right now, I'm not sick. Well, inflammation can come from many places, including poor diet, from toxins, from dysbiosis, from food sensitivity, autoimmunity, and more. And if we carry extra weight, then that fat tissue is actually creating inflammatory compounds that circulate in our body all the time. And it's not always easy to know that inflammation is there. So inflammation is an issue when it comes to weight loss for reasons including that it promotes increased cortisol, that stress hormone that we talked about earlier. It blocks insulin action, so your body ends up producing more insulin to get an insulin response, and then more blood glucose is shuttled into fat storage instead. And it blocks leptin signaling, which is the way that our body suppresses appetite, so that you get this increased appetite and food consumption. Well, what does inflammation look like when you can see it? So we'll start with pain, headache, for example, or joint pain or abdominal pain. Congestion or swelling, like sinus congestion or mucus, or also swelling in the legs and the feet or abdominal swelling. Skin conditions like dermatitis or eczema or rashes, or even allergic skin responses like hives. Redness and irritation, so irritated eyes, for example, is an indicator of inflammation from hay fever, or irritated airways, such as in asthma. And as I mentioned, inflammation on the outside is easier to spot, but it's much harder to identify it on the inside. And in the clinic, we're often using laboratory testing like CRP, ESR, ferritin, autoantibodies, oxidative stress markers. These are all markers that we would use to evaluate the whole picture of inflammation. So do you see yourself in any of these factors as well? Do you have pain? Do you have swelling, congestion? Do you have gum disease or gingivitis? You know, it's been shown that if we have infections in our gums, then the inflammatory compounds that are produced, they do enter our circulation and they can affect other parts of our body that are not in that, oral area. And actually, poor oral health has been associated with increased risk for other things like atherosclerosis, which is deposits in the arteries, and also increased cognitive decline in middle-aged adults, and we don't want that. So oral hygiene is really important. And other things to read down this list, like poor diet, excess sugar, seasonal allergies, asthma, flushing, depression, heart disease, memory difficulties. How to block inflammation? Well, abundant, colorful plant foods are really effective in since the phytonutrients are highly potent and anti-inflammatory agents. Also, omega-3s from fish and herbs and spices. And here is turmeric. This is turmeric, one of my favorite anti-inflammatory spices. I use this in a lot of dishes. And when needed, you can also, if you need to, you can also take its active constituent, which is called curcumin, in a supplement form. Medications. One side effect of a number of medications is actually weight gain. And here are some of them. So antibiotics, and those are acting through the microbiome to exert their effects. Antidepressants and antipsychotics, beta blockers, corticosteroids, some diabetes medications, hormone replacement therapy, and oral contraceptives. So working with a functional medicine practitioner can be a useful way to address the underlying causes of the conditions or the symptoms that have led to using these medications in the first place. And often we see that individuals are able to reduce or even eliminate some of these medications as their symptoms and their physiology improves. So of course, we don't recommend discontinuing any medication without talking to your doctor first, and this is something you have to do in concert with your medical team. Some other factors that your doctor should be ruling out. All of these can potentially be getting in the way of losing weight. So thyroid dysfunction, adrenal dysfunction, stealth infections such as hidden viruses and vector-borne illnesses like Lyme, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or SIBO, food sensitivity, malabsorption. Now, it's unfortunately beyond the scope of this presentation to dive into each of these in great depth, and they're huge topics in and of themselves. But they are situations that you would want to be working closely with a practitioner to both identify the problems and also to work on resolving them. So what are a few things that you can maybe take away from this presentation and start to apply as you've been following along, and maybe you've been checking yourself hopefully against some of the quizzes that we've reviewed, and perhaps you've started to identify some potential patterns for your weight loss resistance. So here are some things that you can think about doing. For high insulin or blood glucose, lowering your carbohydrate intake, maybe using paleo or ketogenic leaning if you need to go a little further. And a couple of supplements that I particularly like are berberine, which is the active constituent of golden seal, and magnesium. And if you're on any diabetes medications, you will need to work with your prescribing physician as you initiate these so that you can adjust the dosing as needed as your blood sugar comes down. For high cortisol, high stress patterns, seek out stress management techniques that resonate with you. This is really highly personalized. Not everyone wants to meditate, although I will say that it's extremely effective for those that want to do it. But perhaps for you, it's a breathing technique or a visualization, or maybe it's exercise or being in nature. And another practice that I like is called Inner Bonding, and it's by a lady called Margaret Hall, and you can find her courses for that online. And that's a really good way of just kind of resetting our view of the world, and just sort of it takes away those underlying thought patterns that can be driving stress. As far as supplements, adaptogens such as ashwagandha and rhodiola can be really helpful for alleviating stress symptoms and reducing their effect on weight retention. However, we do have to be aware that these aren't addressing the underlying reasons for stress in the first place. So those still need our attention, where we might be able to make some changes. Sleep hygiene, getting at least 7 hours of good quality sleep per night. And if you're not sleeping well, there can be many physiological reasons for not sleeping well. So those are worth exploring. For estrogen-dominant patterns, flaxseed and cruciferous vegetables, I've mentioned this. So cruciferous vegetables, that's things like broccoli, cauliflower, bok choy, kale, radishes, and they help to reduce the number of the more potent and the more harmful estrogen types. Fiber helps with estrogen elimination, and magnesium, another important nutrient for estrogen detox via methylation. In fact, we can also bring in a broader methylation support program here. We have a nice dietary and lifestyle program that we use, which is outlined in our ebook, actually, which is for all kinds of methylation imbalances, NTHFR, etc. Detox. Okay, again, this is a great place to start if you're not sure where to begin. And I think by far the biggest impact on our ability to detox is for us to reduce our exposure. And then, of course, we want to be supporting detox by being nutritionally replete, since it's a nutrient-dense process. We want to be eliminating regularly, and it is perfectly okay to talk about poop in our practice. And for supplements, there are many for detox support. One I particularly like is alpha-lipoic acid. And there is a lot we can do to help our detox processes every single day. So basic things like drinking plenty of clean water, eating lots of fiber, eating lots of colorful plant foods, especially herbs and spices, and adequate high-quality protein. And we can supplement that with more intensive bursts of detoxification. Gut, eating fermented foods daily, even with every meal sometimes, as many cultures do, and that helps replenish our microbiome. We can also use probiotics and prebiotic foods. So prebiotics are foods that our gut organisms use for their own food too, so it can actually help to grow healthy microbial populations. And the kinds of foods that we would include in that category would be things like onions and garlic and leeks, Jerusalem artichokes, asparagus, jicama, those are some examples. And just as an aside, if you notice any worsening of any symptoms or weight gain when you add either the probiotics, the fermented foods, or the prebiotics, you may actually have an overgrowth of bacteria, and that's something you should discuss with your doctor. Inflammation. Any one of us that is carrying extra weight needs to reduce inflammation since it comes directly from fat cells as well as all the other sources we talked about. So again, making sure we're eating a variety of colored plant foods, avoiding food sensitivities. These are some easy steps to take. For supplements, a couple of my favorites are curcumin, as you saw on the early slides. That's the active constituent of turmeric again, and boswellia. So this is a lot of great information, hopefully, to go home and try. And I hope you've identified, at least a few things, maybe even a handful of things that you can get started with. As I mentioned, we do offer the 6-day health reset program for those who would like that extra support for intermittent deeper detoxification, and it includes supplements and videos and menu plans, complete menu plans and recipes for the whole 6 days, as well as guidance if you want to create your own meals. You don't have to stick to the recipes and meal plans that we suggested, but they're there if you want to use them. And we've seen some amazing results from this program, even within just the 6 days. So it's a really nice way to kickstart that next level of weight loss. And it also includes a high-quality professional probiotic in there as part of the supplement package that you get, some really nice anti-inflammatory agents, support for proper elimination, and those nutrients like chromium and magnesium that help with blood sugar support. And for those of you who might be interested in having more support or doing the next level exploration with some laboratory testing or personalization of your weight loss program, you can definitely work with us, either obviously Dr. Cara Fitzgerald, Dr. Ken Litwin, who are IFM certified physicians, or certainly one of our nutrition team as well. And don't forget about all the free resources that we do put out there that are just really full of information to help with weight loss resistance and other health concerns. So we have a monthly podcast, and you can catch those on SoundCloud or iTunes, and also they're on our website with full transcripts in case you prefer to read them instead of listen to them. We have regular blogs for both professionals as well as healthcare consumers. We have monthly newsletters that you can sign up for on our website. And also, we're out there on social media through Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn and Pinterest, all that good stuff. A little more health humor. I think we all need a little bit more humor in our lives. So I appreciate you listening to this presentation. There is a little bit of time left, so I will now turn to a couple of the questions that were sent in ahead of time. I'm just going to pull them up here, so bear with me 1 second. Okay, so the first question we had is, how can I make my weight loss sustainable? I've lost weight in the past, but soon after it just comes right back on. Okay, this is just a fabulous question. I mean, so relevant for everybody who is trying to lose weight and make it sustainable over the long term. So the first thing I would say is don't despair. It is completely normal to have periods of greater weight loss, maybe a little bit of weight stabilization, or even a little bit of weight gain sometimes before we cycle back into that next period of weight loss. But what is important is that if we are needing to lose weight, we're still trending in that right direction overall. So the most effective ways to do that is not through calorie counting. It does not work for the long term because we can't all count calories forever, and because it feels very restrictive, and because we're not necessarily changing what foods we eat. And also it's not addressing the underlying causes of the increased weight in the first place necessarily. So for example, if we don't address the microbiome or hormonal imbalances or stress and all of these things that we've been talking about today and others, we can be fighting this losing battle. So the other really important thing is that what we eat has to be enjoyable. We have to find a way to make it feel, pleasurable and enjoyable, and not just full of restrictions and calorie counting. And when we keep sight of what our long-term life goals are and how our health fits into those, then we're also motivated to keep it all happening. But if we fall off along the way, which happens, it happens to every single one of us, we're all human, then it's okay. We just need to seek out the support that we need to get back on. Okay, so the second question I had received was, do I have any favorite online dietary resources? Okay, yes. Yes, I do have them. So for paleo, and I have to say this is one of the benefits of using paleo as a tool, is that there are just many, many resources available to help. So there's online sites and forums and recipes and books, and even restaurants offering paleo menus these days. So ones that I like are Against All Grain. You can find that at the website and also on Facebook. I also like Nom Nom Paleo. That's another good one. But there are others. There's just so many out there. I would encourage you to go and look in bookshops, go spend some time browsing, getting inspired, and all that good stuff. For ketogenic leaning, I'm cautious about online resources because I don't love some of the interpretations of the diet that are out there. One that I might mention, however, that is reliable is Patricia Daly's site, Patricia Daly. So that's D-A-L-Y, and I think her website, it's just her name.com, patriciadaly.com, or you can Google her. Okay, so I think I can squeeze one more question in here. What is a good fiber to choose for weight loss? Okay, so my strong preference is to get our fiber from vegetables and nuts and seeds, because you're not only getting fiber, you're getting a whole host of really important phytonutrients that communicate on many levels with our cells, and they're favorably influencing what is going on in our metabolism. So I think if you're taking a fiber supplement, you may miss the opportunity to get that. But that said, we do use fiber supplements from time to time. I might choose something like Glucomannan, and that's since that has had some studies done on it that relate to weight loss and blood sugar control. That's Glucomannan again. Another one that I like to use is just ground flaxseed. That's a great way to get fiber in a whole food form, but it kind of feels convenient, like a supplement, because it's just ground up and you just measure it out by the tablespoon. So that's pretty easy. And the ground flax seeds, of course, are going to help you with other things as well, like detox and hormone balance, and they have the anti-inflammatory ALA fats, which is another type of omega-3 as well. So, okay, with that, I think we're going to draw to a close. I will thank you again for listening, and please feel free to reach out to us if you have any further questions or comments.